Roe v. Wade was a case in 1970s. Gave states a little more control to decide at what point is abortion, need to be allowed, and at what point they could start implementing restrictions. And it looks like yesterday, or maybe even the night before, there was a Supreme Court opinion draft that got leaked to Politico. And it looks like the current Supreme Court is on the way to kind of overturn Roe versus Wade. And I forget the other one, was it Planned Parenthood versus Casey. And so obviously this would be, at least for our lifetimes, probably one of, if not the largest kind of Supreme Court decision up to this point. And it has obviously impacts on people's lives and political, impacts. So I guess the question for us is like, what part of this do we want to tackle? What questions? We're certainly not experts on any of it, but it'd be nice to kind of explore it together and see how close we can get to what we think is true.
I think it's a dissection. I think it's an exploration, but I do think it's very important to say, at least I would like to say, that like the most difficult part about this is that it's a very, very emotional topic. And we're not women. So like just a very important, I think, disclaimer to start with, because it really can affect people. I mean, people have had to have an abortion. People have considered having an abortion that didn't have an abortion that might be listening to this. Or it might be that you're the husband or boyfriend of someone that you told to have an abortion. There's a lot here, and it's very emotional. And that's why it's so hard to unpack. That's why it's so hard to have a good conversation about this. And to Stephen's point, he's never seen, this is one of the things that came up in our thread. He's never seen a group of people have a fair and nuanced, intelligent, intellectual conversation about this topic. And so I, for one, like selfishly just wanted to discuss this because I want to learn from you guys. I want to hear these unique perspectives on what and how what we should be parsing out and how we should be parsing it out, because to really tie all these different factors and pieces of abortion together, for me, feels overwhelming and impossible. But we should try, because there's just too many little subtopics within it. And without each of those, you're missing the whole. And if you're missing an important subtopic, then you don't have the right to have a black-white decision on the topic itself. So it could take years to like really go through the different layers of this. But that's my goal, at least. I don't know.
Can I tee up Stephen? Because I think Stephen has a very unique perspective on this relative to our peer group. But I think like the crux of the argument comes down to where you believe humanity or like personhood begins, where in like the development process of a newborn, where does that begin? And I think like where you define yourself on that spectrum, like where you think humanity begins, will really like dictate how you feel about abortions. But Stephen, you kind of have like the best summary about this, or like your perspective is very interesting. Why don't you go?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of less interested in debating the morality or merits of abortion itself, than kind of talking about it from a more meta social commentary perspective, I guess. Like I've definitely observed that the arguments I've had with people, or discussions, if you want to call them that, are some of the most like emotionally charged and like least rational I've ever had on any other topic. I think actually most people's arguments are pretty bad. I think that there's a lot of like BS kind of layered on, and like when you ultimately kind of get down the rabbit hole of what you mean, you always sort of end up at the same point. Like what is a human life that has like rights that is worth protecting, and what is not, and this is sort of like deep philosophical discussion. I think one of the main issues with the topic, I think Eric Weinstein actually talked about this, right? There's this idea that humans have that everything is like sort of like a yes or no, or this sort of like black or white thing. I think he talked about how he was asked to come on and do like an immigration discussion on Fox News or some news channel, and then they were just like, okay, are you going to argue the for immigration or against immigration position? He's like, what the hell are you talking about? That's so stupid. And that this is the same, right? Like there's not like some black or white switch you flip on where something becomes okay or not okay. It's sort of like more like things are on the quantum level, right? Where we can only sort of make probability assessments on what something is or isn't, right? And it's kind of like unclear if it's like a black or white thing. I am like really worried that this is going to be sort of the straw that breaks the camel's back for the country. People are very, very mad on Twitter. Twitter is also kind of like a little bit of a left-wing echo chamber. So I kind of expect that. I think people are a little different than they are in the rest of the country. But yeah, I think it could get pretty ugly out there. I think, Nick, to your point, I think a lot of like most people I talk to don't even understand what Roe versus Wade is or the impact on it. Right.
So Stephen, I want to jump in. I don't think people really care. And I think that people often don't even get to the most important part that you're talking about because it stops at a line. And that line is they never get to the part about the dissection of the question of where humanity or humanhood, to your point, Eric, begins, because the line stops at, I'm a woman. This is my body. Don't tell me what the fuck to do. And one of the arguments against this viewpoint is that can take on a form of extremism. If you have the right to do whatever the fuck you want with your body, but that affects this other literal life and entity, well, some people would say, hey, wait a second. Law should protect. Law should step in on a federal level and protect this situation. But most people aren't willing to even go there because they're saying, actually, how interesting that you are someone that is so pro, these libertarian individualistic ideas. But then when it comes down to my body, you, old white man, want to have a say about how I need to live my life. And the conversation starts and begins there in many ways, where we're not able to have a clear, rational, logical conversation because it needs to be about where does a woman's reproductive rights to healthcare. I sent you guys a couple things as well that are going around from like MDs on Twitter and on Facebook and on whatever right now around all of the different number of cases where people really need to have the right to make this decision for themselves. And if they don't, it's like a form of actually disservice to and potentially against the health of the mother. If she doesn't have that right to make that decision, it can affect her livelihood. It can affect her life even. So I just don't think people care. I don't think they get to that point where they want to dissect where Roe v. Wade started, where humanhood, a child's life even begins, because it's that fine point of like, women deserve the right to make this decision for themselves and we should not get in the way. So since the conversation is mainly there, I think we should focus on that and at least dissect.
I think saying people shouldn't care about that's silly. That's the whole point of the why people are mad. Like if Roe is meaningless and it's overturned, there's no reason for the entire country to nuke itself. Because what are you even nuking itself over, right? I think one of the main things people need to understand is that like this doesn't like ban abortion in the country, right? It simply eliminates this sort of like federal mandate about it, right? And it kind of kicks it back to the states. So if you're living in California or New York, like literally nothing is going to change for you, right? To your point, Armand, like I think if people who are pro-choice want to bring more people over to their side as opposed to destroy them, which seems to be the prevailing thing. They need to make better arguments. They need to learn how to make better arguments. People who are pro-choice tend to sort of caricaturize the argument from the right, right? They make them all out to be like complete religious yahoos who are stupid Bible thumpers, right? Instead, they should try to debunk like the libertarian argument against it, the argument against it from like a purely governmental point of view, right? Like my body, my choice, for example, is a bad argument, because the whole point of the root of the argument is that at a certain point, like, it's not just you, right? And like from a libertarian perspective, you have the ability to run around and wave your fist in the air as much as you want until it hits somebody else, right? You do not have complete bodily autonomy once other humans get involved, right? In other areas of the law. Obviously, we see this throughout the law, right? So if you want to like persuade people from that argument, then you need to address those concerns. You can't just be like, because that's you're making you're making like a straw man out of the argument. You try to steel man the other side argument, think what they're coming out, and then try to move from that perspective. But nobody's really doing that at the moment. Like, people are making this out to be very simple. And I understand this because I used to be like super left on this issue. I never thought in a million years I would budge at all from that, but I'm definitely a lot more moderate on it now after, thinking deeply about it and like actually taking the time to understand where people were coming from not like a God told me to do this.